Welcome to Podcast Vlogging Tips and Tricks with Alex Merced. On this podcast, we're going to talk about podcast hosting, podcast recording, promoting, and monetization. We'll also interview podcast hosts about what works and what doesn't work in the podcasting world. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/Alex Merced. Also, if you need hosting for your podcast or your website, head over to libertydeal.info to find out about great deals along with special benefits for taking advantage of those deals. Thank you very much. Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com and welcome to Podcasting and Vlogging Tips and Tricks. And in this episode, we're just going to talk about a little bit more about speaking, and depending on what kind of podcast format you have, if you have an interview-based podcast or just a podcast where you speak for prolonged periods of time, there are tips that you can use, especially for when you're speaking for like long monologues or something like that. And a great way is just to always start out with a story that relates. Because the reason, and again, it's got to be a story that's amusing. I don't want to just hear, oh, I went to a gas station and the gas station was closed. But I would maybe be interested in hearing is like, oh, I needed a thing of butter in the middle of the night because I had this big hankering for cookies. So I went to the gas station in the middle of the night and I got there and it was closed. And I looked through the window and you know what? I saw that there was a big mess in there, and the details. It's the details that make sometimes the simplest story a little bit more interesting. But you also want to relate to what the episode's about. So in this case, I might be talking about, it might be a podcast where I'm talking about middle of the night cravings for whatever reason, if that's the theme of your podcast. But finding relevant stories to connect to what you were talking about will make set the stage for what you're about to talk about by getting people thinking, giving people context ahead of time, but also entertain them ahead of time, give them a little humor to start off the discussion with, and then you can kind of get into the nuts and bolts of what you want to talk about. So whatever you're going to talk about, find an example. Okay, so if I were doing an economics podcast and I were talking about, let's say, externalities, I might start off with saying, you know what, one of the most horrible things riding the subway here in New York City every day is when somebody hasn't taken care of their hygiene. And then now I'm sitting next to someone who, smells, and it just makes my commute that much more painful. And, just kind of go in some sort of story like that, and then explaining how externalities lead to when other people's actions have negative or positive consequences on you. Okay, and I do have a podcast where I talk about these things called Economics Why Not, if you'd like to subscribe to that as well. The bottom line is, if you're doing that monologue podcast or even doing an interview podcast where you may want to tell a story that relates to the interview you're about to play before the interview begins, it'll just help connect ideas better, make your podcast more entertaining, and it'll be a good way to also just develop your ability to speak in public, because you can apply that logic to speaking in public as well. So humor works, stories work, it works. So I'll see you guys next week on Podcasting and Vlogging Tips and Tricks. If you've been enjoying the podcast, please go on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and leave a review. Those reviews help all of these podcasts get ranked better, and so that way people can find these podcasts and listen to these podcasts. And if you haven't checked out my other podcasts, head over to alexmerced.com, where you can find out all the different things that I'm involved in. And also, if you want to support the show, head over to patreon.com/Alex Merced and become a patron. And give us some, a monthly support, so that way that helps us cover the cost of all the domain names, the hosting, and all the other expenses that it takes to run all these different podcasts and all these different media outlets to help provide people with information. Thank you very much. My name's Alex Merced. I'll see you guys next week.